Well, first of all, welcome everyone, and thank you for coming at this time of year. I know for higher education as well as for secondary schools, it's a challenging time of year, the end of the year, so we appreciate your attendance today. I'm Phyllis Gimbel, the Assistant Coordinator of Writing Across the Curriculum, and on behalf of our Dean, Dr. Anna Bradfield, seated to my right on the corner there, and Dr. Michelle Cox, seated to my left, also on an extreme corner, who is the Writing Across the Curriculum Coordinator, and all of our panelists, we welcome you here today. This conversation is a pretty serious conversation. I did some research on this, and I came up with a couple of things that I'd like to talk about with you. One of the most important things from the National Writing Project: we cannot build a nation of educated people who can communicate effectively without teachers and administrators who value and understand writing. At this time, our nation is poised to infuse writing into the K-16 curriculum. The Common Core standards have been adopted by 47 states and the District of Columbia, and the English language arts and literacy standards set benchmarks for literacy in history, social studies, math, the sciences, and technical coursework. The increased focus on reading and writing is no longer the sole burden of English and writing teachers, but the responsibility of all teachers across grade levels and subjects. The Common Core state standards, among other skill sets, expect students to adapt their communication in relation to audience, task, purpose, and discipline. For schools to meet this responsibility, administrators and teachers of all disciplines and grade levels should be adept in both literacy and content. No longer can a teacher see a struggling student writer and say, "That's not my job." While at the university level, writing across the curriculum programs such as ours help accomplish this, how will secondary teachers in all CCSS subject areas meet this requirement? How will secondary school teachers move to expository writing? The CCSS do not offer guidance or professional development in how to do this. The need for students to meet the CCSS presents both a challenge and an opportunity for middle level and high schools. Effectively meeting this challenge will require a school-wide effort that engages teachers across the school in providing instruction focused on writing. Today, our panelists, composed of secondary school teachers and college educators, will discuss the impact of CCSS on writing across the curriculum at the secondary level and what that exactly means in the transition for writing at college level. First, the Dean of Bridgewater State University College of Education and Allied Sciences, Dr. Anna Bradfield, will offer an overview of CCSS as they pertain to writing in English language arts, math, and a draft of the science standards, which will be out quite soon. And then I will come back and speak to you about the order of the panelists. Dr. Bradfield.
That's not.
I'm so sorry.
It's not my glasses, I don't think. And of course, we all named our presentations whack. Welcome to Bridgewater. We're delighted to have you here, and I want to say a particular thanks to Michelle Cox and to Phyllis for pulling this together. As Phyllis mentioned, there really isn't a more important topic in education right now than the movement towards new standards for our schools and better prepared students for higher education and beyond. This really is CCSS, Common Core State Standards. And this presentation really is going to be about the Massachusetts New Curriculum Standards, or CCSS, and moving toward the National Common Core. I didn't put into my slide presentation because I only have 15 minutes the data behind the accomplishments of students in Massachusetts. And while Massachusetts students do in fact have the highest scores on most tests in the nation, we still are abysmally lacking in many areas. We still have an incredible achievement gap amongst the highest achievers and the lowest achievers. And what we know pretty well is that the system that we currently have, which is really teaching to the 10th grade, so that we can pass MCAS, is not working. So as we go forward and think about the adoption of the new Massachusetts curriculum standards, I hope you'll keep that in mind. I also would say to you, we are deep in this work, not only with our higher education partners, but also our K-12 partners. And so I know that some of you sitting in this audience will have heard some of the stuff that I'm going to say. Some of your districts, those of you who come from K-12, are probably well on your way to getting your curriculums adapted. But I can also say that we've been involved in the last 2 months in 12 different presentations of introducing or diving deeper into the standards. And what we found is that the districts vary from districts who are well on their way. Every teacher in every classroom understands what's happening. They don't have the lesson plans yet, but they know what's happening. And at the other end, we have principals that say, what Common Core? So I'm sort of shooting for the middle here as I do the presentation. The National Common Core was developed as a national curriculum. We are one of the few advanced nations in the world that does not have a national education Common Core. And in part that's because of our structure and the fact that education is considered and is in fact a state's right. But until we develop some kind of a common understanding across the whole nation about what achievement is, it's going to be very difficult for us to advance our students. Nearly every state in the Union is working individually and collectively to improve academic standards and assessments to assure that students graduate with knowledge and skills most demanded by college and careers. That phrase, college and careers, is one of the identifying phrases of the new Common Core. Those of you who have looked at the former Massachusetts standards, maybe in the engineering standards, but almost in no other place was there a conversation about college and career readiness. And that's really what the new Common Core is about. This is just a map of the states that have adopted the Common Core. Each state was given the opportunity to modify the National Common Core by 5%. Our state, I don't think, even came up with 5%. Sometimes you'll hear, oh, well, we're dumbing down our curriculum. We're doing, Massachusetts has always been the best, and now we're adapting a national curriculum. We're dumbing down our curriculum. There was less than 5% of the standards that were changed here. And so, no, we're not dumbing down our curriculum at all. The primary intent of the new English language arts and math curriculum frameworks, and right now, folks, those are the only 2 curriculum frameworks that are available. I'll tell you about science in just a minute, but social studies is a ways away yet. Compromise primarily of the Common Core state standards were written explicitly to define the knowledge and skills that students must master to be college and career ready. What this does is bring together our 2 silos. Our 2 silos being K-12 and higher ed. Because we in higher ed are evaluating what it is and giving information about what it is we expect as these standards were developed and are being developed. And K-12 is now looking forward to saying, okay, it's more than just the 10th grade, it's more than just MCAS. How do our kids get ready to go on to either higher education or advanced training after graduation? Just sort of the key advances in the Common Core. In mathematics, we have focus, coherence, and clarity. By the way, the mathematics standards are divided into 2 different types of standards. There are, and you'll see this in a minute, but the mathematics standards are identified for every student. What are the math skills that every student should know at the various grade levels? And then we have a discrimination in the mathematics standards for those students who will be seeking STEM careers. So the math standards really say, okay, here's a minimum level of competency in mathematics for grade 9 or grade 10. But then if we know this is a student who is interested or capable, here's the next level of standards. And that's one thing that's unique about the mathematics standards. They promote rigor through mathematical proficiency and foster reasoning and understanding. They are also divided into conceptual categories in a much different way than the former standards were. In English language art and literacy, it balances informational text and literature and focuses on text complexity. There's an emphasis on argument, informative, explanatory writing, and research. Speaking and listening skills are included in this area. And there are literacy standards, and that's really why we're here tonight, for history, science, and technical subjects. As Phyllis said, writing is no longer just the purview of the English language arts or literacy faculty. It is the purview of all faculty, according to the new standards. I'll tell you, as we've worked with our K-12 partners, both in the College of Education and in our Regional Readiness Center, this has been the thing that got the biggest deer in the headlights look. The chemistry professors who say, you mean I'm now responsible for chemistry and writing? And the answer is yes. Writing in your field, but literacy is incorporated. What is the college and career ready threshold in each of the frameworks? In ELA and literacy, the framework there is set as a broad college and career standards for each of the areas of reading, writing, speaking, listening, and language, and they are anchored in grade-specific standards. In mathematics, the framework's threshold is comprised of that for the high school standards that are not marked plus. So that's the ones where everybody must, every student, if you look at the standards and there's no plus out beside it, that means every student should be able to master that standard. And the ones that have the plus, if you look at them, are the ones that are this is the STEM ready. This is the next step up in mathematics. Key features of the ELA literacy framework. It promotes the student's ability to read and comprehend and increasingly complex text and write to a source. I'm not going to sort of quote these standards to you, but if you go to the other two, your left side of the slide, promotes the idea that teaching literacy skills is not just the job of the English teacher. Literacy standards are included for history, social studies, science, and technical subjects. And they promote the development of strong research skills. Just to give you an idea, there we go. Just to give you an idea of the of how things got developed, 2009, the governor and the commissioner of the elementary and secondary education signed the MOU. The summer and spring, the local Department of Elementary and Secondary Education staff and local educators provided feedback to the drafts. The drafts were then studied by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Additional standards were defined in the fall of 2010, and in December of 2010, the new standards, or the CCSS, were adopted. What comes next? The Common Core state standards are critical, but they are just the first step. Common assessments aligned to the Common Core will help to ensure the new standards truly reach every classroom. And in Massachusetts, that acronym, and you've probably already heard it, is PARCC, P-A-R-C-C. Some people say PARCC is the new MCAS. That probably may be true in theory. That's not what you're going to read in regulation because there is actually a transition. There has not been an actual adoption of the PARCC assessment because we don't have it yet. It's in development. But it's very clear that the standards are changing, and so the assessments will change. I'm going to skip that one because I'm over time here. To make sure that we have appropriate assessments rather than a one-shot only, in the PARCC there are 2 summative assessments designed to make sure that students are on college and career readiness track and to measure the full range of standards and full performance continuum. And then there are 2 formative assessments, which, as we know, are not MCAS. And those formative assessments are being designed really almost as we speak tonight. As I said, I'm a little behind the schedule, so I'm a little ahead. So let me just skip through this part. Building a pathway to college and career readiness for all students. The standards start in K, and actually there are early childhood standards. K2 formative assessment is being developed to align with the PARCC system. Soon, all students in preschool will be. I'm looking at Sue Eliason because today was the day I worked on the kindergarten assessment. There will be a standardized assessment for kindergarten readiness for all students in Massachusetts, so that not only is the alignment occurring at the up end, the alignment is also occurring in pre-K as well. And 3 to 8, timely student achievement data showing students, parents, and educators whether all students are on track. In high school, college readiness score to identify who is ready for college level work. And targeted intervention to support 12th grade bridge courses, PD for educators, and those kinds of things to make sure that we're moving. The PARCC timeline, and this is one that scares, that also kind of puts people in deer in the headlights. School year 2010 and 11 was the launch and design phase. School year 2011 to 12, development begins. That's right now. School year 2012 and 13 is the first year of the pilot, field testing and related research and data collection on the PARCC assessment. 2013 through 14 is the second year pilot, field testing. 2014-15, full administration of the PARCC assessments, and summer of 2015 will be when the achievement levels will be set, including college-ready performance. Just one other thing that I did want to talk to you very briefly about, and that is science, because people ask this question. Science is the next set of curriculum standards that are coming online. Those standards should be up. The initial standards should be up, if they're not already up, on the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education website soon. On May 14th at 1 o'clock, here on campus, we will be having a Department of Elementary for 3 hours from 1 to 4. We will be having a rollout of the science standards. And if you're interested in attending that, you need to register on the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education website. And if you don't know how to do that, probably go to your principal or superintendent's office and they can tell you to do it. All of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education workshops have a central registration point, and we would invite you to come and join us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bradfield. The plan is this. We sent out flyers, and so we have decided that the order of panelists speaking today will be exactly in the order of the flyer that we sent out, and that's how they're seated accordingly. So the speakers today are Dr. Elizabeth Gonsalves, English Department Chair from Abington High School, followed by David Mills, History Teacher, Grade 8, Milton Public Schools, and soon to receive a CAGS from Bridgewater State University on May 9th. Jeffrey Schoonover, Director of Instruction and Assessment, Portsmouth, Rhode Island Public Schools, and also a graduate of the Ed Leadership Program here at Bridgewater State. And Dr. Paulina Sabinen, Assistant Professor of Math Education here at Bridgewater State. Dr. Matt Salamoni, Assistant Professor of Math here at Bridgewater State, and Dr. Michelle Cox, the Coordinator of Writing Across the Curriculum Program. After they speak, I will tell you what follows. And don't worry, there is plenty of food that will be served at 6:15. Elizabeth.
Thank you. Excuse me. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Gonsalves, and I'm the Department Chair at Abington High School, and I'm bringing to you today an English teacher's perspective. These are the three questions we were asked to speak to today. What is your role in the writing? What is the role of writing in your field? Show and provide us with an example of a writing activity, And how do you see the Common Core state standards impacting what you were doing with writing now in your classrooms? And yes, there is an app for that, and it's on my iPhone, and I consult it regularly. The role of writing in English language arts. Traditionally, when I started teaching in 1983, writing even in English was to answer questions on tests and to bring a composition through the writing process. So in a sense, writing for us is an assessment method by which we determine students' knowledge and comprehension of a text. We use writing to measure student ability now to engage in higher order thinking skills for students to apply their knowledge, to analyze a text, to synthesize the effects in a given text and across texts, to evaluate the quality of text, and to create new text. You'll recognize Bloom's taxonomy has added another layer, and not imitation but creation is perhaps the sincerest form of flattery for a writer. However, writing is more than a method in English language arts. It is a skill and an art in and of itself. And besides just using it as a tool or a technique, we want to give students the ability to claim writing as one of their many talents. These are some of the things we do in ELA that students can use writing for. You can see on your left some typical daily tasks, whether it's searching, recording responses, participating in discussion, taking notes, questions, but also expressing an opinion, persuading an audience, entertaining an audience, composing speeches and action plans, sometimes simply to create something beautiful. And we hope our students will be able to use their writing talent to change the world, their immediate world, their local world, the world. And don't forget, with the Common Core state standards, writing is what will be used to demonstrate skill proficiency to an external source in order to graduate from high school. And even though we will be writing across the curriculum, right now, English departments own that responsibility in public schools in Massachusetts. Ultimately, what is writing for us in English language arts? Writing is a sign that the author has thought about X and crafted a text for an audience to achieve a particular purpose. And whether they're in the classroom or not, that's what writing is about. Hopefully for students to be able to do that in a voice that is unique and personal, but also appropriate for various occasions. What do we do at Abington High School? This is the formal writing that occurs in the English department. One might also call it summative writing. We have common midterms and exams, midterms and finals in response to a text or series of texts, so that's 90 minutes, one essay. AP does a lot of work in timed writing. We do open response writing, usually 2 or 3 in 45 minutes. We do that often. Multi-draft compositions might be once or twice in a marking period. Presentations and PowerPoints are also a form of writing. We do creative writing infrequently, sad to say. And in my class, I teach AP language this year. Students have been working all year on a first lecture in the spirit of Randy Pausch's last lecture. They compose a first lecture over the summer, and they do a revision of that essay in about every marking period. That essay also is a presentation, and it becomes many of their college essays. So they get the sense of working over a long period of time on an essay. I'd like to share some examples to speak to student writing. And one thing that I've been doing to help my students write for one another and an authentic audience is to have a blog for each one of my classes. The AP Language and Composition blog are juniors. They share that with another section taught by another teacher. I have 2 sections of seniors in a required semester course of expository writing. Those 2 sections of mine share a blog, and my sophomores have their very own blog that they don't get to share with anyone, and they're very excited about that. So what I thought I would do is show you a little bit about what the longest running of the 3 blogs looks like. 12,688 visits since August of this past year. And as you can see, we have a central guiding question. We use Shea et al., the language of composition, as our advanced placement text. And Chapter 5 is about work. And the question is, how does work shape and influence our lives? So they have a weekly prompt and a weekly discussion, and there are 47 comments. We have 50 students across 2 classes, and they write for one another. And you can see throughout their comments that they will start to reference one another. I get in and make a comment. Greg, Colleen said, "What?" So you'll see they're writing substantively now and thoughtfully. They're always given bulleted questions. Jamie jumps in. They're responding more personally. Lauren says, "I agree with Colleen that work does influence people's relationships." They talk about their own work experience. We're also reading The Great Gatsby and how people judge each other according to work and social class. At the same time, we're reading Barbara Ehrenreich's anchor essay in this chapter, Serving in Florida, which is from Nickel and Dimed. So we use the blog to process our reading. They are scored not with any grade, but simply that they have done it, and that students rarely miss this opportunity to converse with one another. And the first part of our weekly discussion is spent reviewing the blog. Students are excited. They, in fact, can do it on their phones. We provide them with additional pages and additional links, and they might write on the blog once, twice a week. And we're finding that it really does engage students. The sophomores also, they don't have a counter on their website. But what they're doing today is we're working in nonfiction. You know, the Common Core State Standards is asking English teachers to move over to literary nonfiction. They were given the opportunity to choose their very own first nonfiction for a project. So they're reading a range of memoir, history, science, humanities. And they had to investigate their author today, and they just have this for homework, so there's only one comment. In evaluating nonfiction, we're using an AP acronym called SOAP. I don't know if you know SOAPstone. Those of you who are AP teachers, subject, occasion, audience, purpose, evidence, and then to help them remember, we have SOAPy TV, text, and voice. So whenever they read something, they use this acronym to identify the features of author choice and intent. So most students have responded to this, and some of them will use the outline. Some people will write as a paragraph. But they are now teaching each other about nonfiction, and there are as many texts as there are students in the class. So we hope to introduce them to nonfiction in a sort of exponential way. And our archives are all there. If you would like to visit our blog, if you see the Gmail address, I'd be happy to send you an invitation. So those are 2 of our 3 blogs. Another example of what we're doing, this is my sophomore class also, integrating creative and interpretive writing. I told you that we bemoan the fact that we really don't do as much creative writing as we do aesthetic reading, and our students really like poetry. So we read in a unit on telling the truth, including the texts you see above, from memoir and comedy to poetry, up to and including Catherine Stockett's novel, The Help. They wanted to write creatively, so their assessment for reading was to write something creative, to write a poem, to write a short story. One student decided to do creative nonfiction in an essay, and still another, an infographic. Are you familiar, any of you, with infographics or the site, the Daily Infographic? I thought I would just show you today's. We start each day with the Writer's Almanac with Garrison Keillor, which some of them love, and some of them it's like the proverbial nails on the chalkboard. But we also look at the Daily Infographic to see how informational text is being packaged nowadays. This site aggregates some of the best infographics, and today's was the anatomy of a job interview. So my sophomores, juniors, and seniors saw this today. The do's and don'ts, and some of them are starting to actually ask, can I do an infograph instead of an essay? And the answer is yes, if it helps you to accomplish and achieve your purpose. So we created a class anthology of creative writing. They all received a copy. Stage 2 was the interpretive essay. We use McDougall-Attell's, now Holt McDougall's Language of Literature text. We're in the 2006 copyright. Every unit has a writer's workshop chapter. So we did the writer's workshop on interpretive essays. We were supplied with strong, average, and weak examples from the textbook company, which they reviewed. And then they wrote interpretive essays on each other's creative work. The process involved writing a draft, then interviewing the author during that draft about his or her choices. When we read these texts, we asked about author choice, craft, and structure, and what can you as a writer learn from another writer, how to use a text as a model. Students revised and edited, and then authors got the opportunity to review the essays about their work, and then students redrafted if necessary and submitted their essays for a final grade. And they were very proud of their work, and they took this analysis very seriously because they had to look the author in the eye. And I think that made a big difference for one of their first interpretive essays. I mean, we wrote about Ray Bradbury's tone in Fahrenheit 451 and the character who taught them the most in Midsummer Night's Dream. They wrote creatively about night, but this interpretive essay was significant. And I do have some of their work with me if you'd like to see it. They really did talk about word choice, syntax, patterns, repetition, theme. And they were all working on the same theme, so they were all in the same ballpark. So, that being said, how is the Common Core State Standards impacting what we do now? Well, the irony is, even though we've always been reading literature, we have rarely been sitting around writing creatively. We have been expository writing in Massachusetts since the frameworks came out. We have been assessed at grades 4, 7, and 10 by means of an expository essay. And even though they're not essays, open response items are also expository text-based. So our kids have been writing for over a decade now in expository fashion. For over a decade, so we've been preparing them. And really, we made a shift in our senior year to a required semester course. First it was full year, now it's a semester. About a dozen years ago, department heads in the South Shore were invited to come to Bridgewater State University for a K-16 articulation meeting. Professors then didn't know what NCAS was about and what we were doing, and we were under the misguided apprehension that they were studying literature their freshman year. They weren't. And we were told the most important thing they could learn to do was to pose a thesis and defend it. So we shifted to expository writing and gave up British literature because it was going to be important for people who decide to become English majors, but much more important to students for college and career was expository thesis-based writing, and not the 5-paragraph kind either. We had to move beyond that. The truth is, we do not know what writing tasks will be expected on any PARC assessment or Common Core assessment at this time. They're in design. And unfortunately, and I want to state my objection to it here, and I'd like to, like the president, perhaps ask for an amen. The specter of computer scoring of student writing is looming large before it, and I say no. I don't know who they have to hire to do it, and maybe it can be me, but I don't think a computer can evaluate critical thinking and aesthetic and voice. And I think that's where we might be missing the boat. So I don't know what relation to the baby in the bathwater that is, but no. What are we doing in Abington? All teachers at Abington High School in English Language Arts, I should have edited that, have been trained in AP Language Instruction and Assessment Strategies, and we're having our middle school teachers trained in language with a focus on argument also, if the budget allows, in the next year. Students need to read more expository writing, so we're looking at class sets of essays and speeches to have on hand for in-class close reading. We're looking to establish thematic arcs of both literature in a variety of aesthetic genres and nonfiction, including fiction, essay, and memoir. And one thing that the state standards actually are letting us do is having students write narrative, both personal and imaginary. And we haven't had permission to do that before. That's kind of exciting. We will be focusing more on craft and structure, more integration of a greater variety of sources and research writing of all kinds, as Dean Bradfield mentioned. And we'll be having more conversation about writers' choices, both in when they read and when they write. On my summer reading list are a few books that I also have with me. Carol Jagos with Rigor for All, Tom Newkirk's The Art of Slow Reading, Jeff Wilhelm's Teaching Literacy for Love and Wisdom, and the Massachusetts former Teacher of the Year, very involved in the writing project in Amherst and Boston, Bruce Penniman, building the English classroom, and of course, who would leave home without the Massachusetts curriculum state standards? I heard Mary Ellen Caesar at one of the Readiness Center events call it the Green Monster. That's sticking. I would advise anyone who wants to be actively involved in the conversations beyond this panel to consider the New England Association Teachers of English and the Massachusetts Reading Association, which are our local arms of the NCTE and the IRA, the kind that reads, and that the NCTE convention is going to be in Boston 2013. And that's a once-in-a-decade or two opportunity, and that conversation should be very rich. ASCD and CAPN, of course. Bridgewater State University has been kind enough, and I see some of my colleagues here, to host the South Shore Department Heads in English Language Arts. Connect has shared their rubrics with us, and we are looking to form the English Language Arts Collaborative at Bridgewater State University to sponsor Common Core-based professional development beginning next academic year. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And now we'll hear from David Mills.
Where am I? My name is David Mills. I teach 8th grade history in Milton. I'd like to thank Phyllis Kimball and the other panelists for having me here this afternoon. You can always tell if a guy is wearing his best suit, then he probably has the worst credentials of anyone on the panel. Jeff has a nice suit, but I got married in this suit. But I'm happy to talk to you here today from the front lines of education from the middle school classroom. In social studies, writing has often been a means for assessing students' understanding of the content. This is true for U.S. history, for psychology, for economics. The content usually drives the writing. Much of that writing, especially in the middle school, but also the high school, is informal in social studies. So brief essays, newspaper articles, journaling. And here behind me, this is an example of a creative writing piece from a student. He was writing a 3-part memoir as if he were a member of the Ndongo people of Africa, kidnapped, transported, and sold in Brazil as a slave. He fills his account with detail, descriptions of wonder and torment, the smells of Rio de Janeiro, the horrors of the slave ship, just like this, in one large paragraph for 7 consecutive pages. So this is the type of writing that a middle school will do if you kind of take the reins off. They'll go for it, and they'll love it, but the structure is kind of, well, it's not there. Mind you, he hit all points of the rubric. He wrote an empathetic account of the horrors of the Atlantic slave trade, and he incorporated content from the class and the unit. He got 100. He also, last year, had a perfect score on the MCAS in math and literacy. So he's no slouch, for sure. But there's something missing here. And there's still room for assessments like this, I think, in the Common Core. My classes also have a blog, not as involved as Elizabeth's example, but they do access the internet, do some research, respond to each other's writing. Last month we did a research project that was based completely on the Common Core that we designed this year, and the students had to research a Renaissance personality and then make a Facebook page of that person. So a little bit of the old-fashioned research and kind of their mode or medium of expressing that. But I think that the Common Core will demand more out of this student and, well, like a paragraph or two, and will demand more out of teachers like me. If you zoom in a little bit, you see in the middle there, he puts in parentheses, did I mention I was naked? He did 3 pages prior. I remember reading that. I'm sorry, I am. But that's something that, as a history teacher, I probably would not correct in the past the content. He talked about what he was wearing, what it was like, or the humiliation of that. But I probably would not say, you already mentioned that, try this again, for example. So the Common Core, I think, will move history closer to English in terms of assessing not just content, but writing and presentation and research. So the content will now be a vehicle for the skills of writing, research, and speaking. And this can be a major shift for this particular discipline. Even structured writing, like the classic 5-paragraph essay in social studies, is not regularly assessed for word choice, for sentence structure or tone. And student revision is rare. And students don't know that they can write 7 paragraphs, or 8 if they need to. They don't have to stick to the 5-paragraph essay. And most of them don't know that because in social studies, we don't model that. And I think in the Common Core, we're going to have to show them this is what good writing is. This is what it looks like. Here's an example of it. For those of you here tasked with implementing the Common Core, remember that this may be a bit of a culture shift for your social studies teachers, and they will need support and training to do the job well, and they'll also need modeling. So the teachers themselves are going to have to know what's expected of them, and what a good example of writing in social studies is. And there's an opportunity, I think, social studies meets the Common Core requirement of nonfiction reading and research and writing within a particular discipline. So over the next year in Milton, my fellow social studies teachers and I will be spending a lot of time with the English department, syncing our writing instruction, learning about assessing literacy, and getting our language more common. So when a student hears something like soapy TV, for example, in my class, and they already know what that is. So this increased focus on writing and research has already forced social studies teachers in my department to cut content from the curriculum, which is good for the student probably in the long run, but really bad for that teacher who usually spends 2 months on the causes of World War I, and now has to put that binder on the shelf. So in my classroom, my content is gradually getting less and less. The units are getting longer and longer, and the assessments are moving from tests and papers to research. From tests to papers and research and presentations. So hopefully, the transition will be smooth. I think it will be bumpy for a lot of departments, not just social studies. But this is a good transition. I think students will have forgotten most of the content in my class by July. But hopefully they will carry over their skills in writing and research with them into high school and beyond. Thank you.
Thanks, David. And now we go to science. Jeffrey Schoonover.
All right, good afternoon. I feel a little bit like a stranger in a strange land. I'm now an administrator in Rhode Island. I do happen to live in Massachusetts. My kids attend public schools in Massachusetts. My wife is a high school English teacher in Massachusetts, and the first 5 years of my teaching career were in Massachusetts. So although I've been in Rhode Island now for 11 years, I still feel very much part of Massachusetts, even though I do not have MCAS. We have NECAP. I'll try not to, which is New England Common Assessment. It's Rhode Island partners with New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont, and we all have the same test. Connecticut and Massachusetts are those 2 rogue states. So anyway, I have been a physics teacher for 16 years, department chair in science for 9, and most recently I am now in the central office as director of instruction and assessment. But I will still focus today on science. Now, just to start out, what we hear, PARC will be about 50% multiple choice, 50% constructed response. Of the constructed response, now I heard this from David Coleman, who was one of the lead authors of the Common Core and developers of the Common Core. He said at a conference recently that about 75 to 85% of those constructed response questions that students will be reading and then writing about will actually have a science or social studies flavor to it. It'll be a prompt, with some reading that takes place in one of those two subjects, and then they need to write about it. Now, with that said, what I wanted to focus on today is this idea of, it's already been mentioned, arguments. And in science, traditionally, writing in science is in the form of a lab report. And we, science teachers, always focus on what we call claims and evidence, which you find that language in the standards. And this is the writing standards, if you're not familiar with the notation there, W writing, HST, history, science, and technical subjects. This is a grade 11-12 standard, and I just put in red if you can see it well. Some of the language I just wanted to point out, but it says students will introduce knowledgeable claims, establish the significance of those claims, then later on develop claims, supplying the most relevant data and evidence for each one, using that in a discipline-appropriate form, so maybe the lab report in science, and then provide a concluding statement that follows from that argument. And I'll just focus on this for a few minutes, and then I'll show some examples. This idea of arguments, I know we're talking about writing across the curriculum today, but this idea of an argument also appears in the math Common Core standards. And one of the practices is to construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. And it says that, and I did not put all the language in there, but the mathematically proficient student justifies conclusions, communicates them to others, argues with others in a productive way, and so on. As it was referred to already, these next generation science standards will be, actually they were supposed to be released over the past 2 weeks, and it's been delayed, and now they're saying by the first week of May. In Rhode Island, I'm on the state leadership team that is reviewing and developing these science standards, so I've been looking at these now for months. I was hoping to share a structure of this today, just to show that in the science standards there are references to ELA and math Common Core standards. So every time in one of these standards that we can reference ELA and math, it is noted on the particular standard. As in the math, the science standards also have these practices. They're called the science and engineering practices. And for this particular one, it says, this is from the framework document, not the actual standards themselves. I'm not violating any confidentiality agreements I've signed. It says that there's this, chief among these practices is this commitment to data and evidence as the foundation for developing claims. Okay, so this idea of arguments are found in all three of these standards. Another writing sample for science in these, it's really history, science, and technical subjects. Writing informative and explanatory texts, including scientific procedures, experiments, and technical processes. I took out the history component of that, which I think was research papers. And it's, again, using domain-specific vocabulary and that content-specific vocabulary, managing the complexity of the text, which is such a key component of the Common Core, that text complexity, Lexile scores are really being ramped up for college and career readiness. And we have this other piece that refers to this concluding statement again. So I just wanted to show where in the ELA standards for writing there are these, where it relates to science and this idea of arguments, claims, and evidence. One of the things that we find in science, and this is actually an 8th grade sample of work here, but we always find that students are great about making claims, they never support them with evidence. And as most teachers know, if you're asking a student to write to answer a question, if you don't write, justify, explain your thinking, if you don't have one of those descriptors in there, students will not provide the evidence. So this is something that we are really building on. We find it's not blaming middle schools, but students as they're entering the high school, ninth graders, they do not have that skill yet for backing their claims up with evidence. So this is one of the tools that we started using this year in 8th grade. We're actually also using it in 9th. This is an 8th grade sample. After completing a lab, before the student actually begins to write the conclusion and to formalize the whole thing, we give them this blank sheet of paper and say, okay, what's your major claim? Okay, so this student, it was some amino acid activity. What's your evidence? You can see she had 3 bullets there. This is comparing amino acid sequences for various creatures, and then identifying. You can see the donkey is is closest to the horse, the snake is most unlike, but regardless. So we have the claim, what's your evidence, and then the other component. I mean, that's difficult enough usually for students to provide the evidence, but in the Common Core it's also about the reasoning and the warrant. So that's the next 2 items that we've included here is to further enhance their skill here. So what's the reasoning? So why does that evidence support the thesis, the claim? And then reasoning part 2, explain the underlying concept. So not only do we have to have them providing the evidence, but why does that evidence make sense? So we are using this type of, we've adjusted to a Common Core, and just also for those weaknesses that we've seen over years by introducing just a simple strategy like this to try to help students develop that persuasive writing, argumentation, whatever you want to call it, which we know not only will make them better scientists, but it will make them better writers and make them better mathematicians. Another piece of that, after completing this, the student would also have a rubric. And this is a quick self-assessment. What are the categories? What do I need to do to improve this a little bit more? Okay, so you can see there she said, add one more claim and some other things. All right, so that's one sample. This one, I apologize. You can't see that, so I'm just going to fly through this one. This is a biology example. This is what we call a biology CCA, a Common Course Assessment. Every biology student in Portsmouth High School, about 250 of them, are involved in 4 of these CCAs every year, in addition to many other common tasks. For this one, based on Common Core, we had students read 2 articles. Well, one was really a research journal, because we know that in Common Core that by the time the students graduate from high school, 70% of their reading should be informational, 30% literature. That doesn't mean that ELA is having any less impact or use of literature in their classroom. It just means that science and social studies have to add more. So here, this certain activity, students read a scientific journal. I believe it was some research out of UC Santa Cruz on a sea otter population, reductions in sea otter population in the Pacific. Based on that article, they had to give one possible explanation. So you see that's on the left side. And then we give them another article. I believe this one was from the New York Times. So just some more information related to that reduction in the sea otter population. And then students had to give a reason. You can see it's underlined on the bottom there above that box. It says give one reason and provide an explanation. So we want them to get in the habit of really writing some type of claim, making a stance. It could be wrong, but backing it up with some information that they've gathered so far. And this goes on. This was like a 16-page assessment that took 2 blocks, so roughly 3 hours to complete. Here they create their own hypothesis, describe an experiment that they would conduct if they were a researcher trying to investigate this reduction in the otter population. More reading. The question there, number 5, why do you think the scientists used 2 methods based, again, on this third article they've read? Some data and graphs to analyze, which is another component of Common Core. A lot of some writing prompts from what we're told will be like this, and students have to explain what that means. More writing, answering questions, getting a little bit more specific at this point, including some diagrams there, a food web, and goes on, and finally a couple of concluding paragraphs. And in some of those questions, I know it is difficult to read, but the idea of claims and counterclaims were also introduced. Okay, so you've made a stance so far. Now there's research that is supporting something else. Explain what the difference is. Why? Maybe how can these two be correct? Both be correct. Why do you think that one is wrong, and so on? So we get not only just claims of evidence, but also involve the concept of using counterclaims. And all of this was a result of really 2 things. Seeing the need for something like this based on the Common Core standards, but also in Rhode Island we have in our science standards a science inquiry component. And we have 3 days of science testing. The 3rd day is completely constructed a response like this, where students have about an hour and a half to solve one problem in this format. So we realize that we have to give students much practice during the year in order to be successful, but it's not just teaching to the test, it's good strategies. These are good skills for students to have. Another component of the Common Core is not just writing in history, science, and technical subjects, but it's also reading in those subjects. And I just wanted to introduce this because it does have a writing aspect to it. All right, so using a textbook, summarize complex concepts, processes, or information presented in a text by paraphrasing them. What we've seen, let's just say, I copy these 2 diagrams from some common chemistry books, one by Prentice Hall, one by Holt. This is something I'm not sure about Massachusetts, but I know students from Rhode Island, when they have a chemistry question involving activation energy and endo and exothermic reactions, students do horribly on it. It's just consistently, every year there's a question, every year they bomb it. But when we have these questions in a book, I'm not sure what the chemistry teacher does with them. So we have to have simple strategies like, here's a diagram. It could be 5 or 10 minutes in class. It could be a homework assignment. Explain this diagram in your own words. Rather than reading a section and answering 3 questions at the end of the chapter, what does this diagram mean to you? Use the academic vocabulary that's in these graphs. If you have to define those words, fine, but just what does this mean? Okay? Another example, this is from a biology textbook. This is the nitrogen cycle. But what does this mean? You read some of those words in there too, and denitrifying, maybe it's not that complicated. Decomposers, there are some chemistry symbols in there. I mean, this is frightening to some people. But students have to understand what all of that means, and they have to put it in their own words. If we just rely on the teacher explaining this for a few minutes, the kids aren't going to get it. They have to write about it in their own words, maybe turn and talk with a neighbor, and explain it to someone else. That's how it's going to become embedded. And I use these last few examples because I also saw a sample, I guess it's just a PARC-like assessment. It might have been used by PARC to, when they were putting out their RFPs for publishers to create the tests. But there was one, it was like this. It was a food web question. And it was a writing prompt based on a food chain. And there were some writing prompts associated with it, but it was all about science and analyzing, interpreting what that diagram meant to them. All right, so this is just some simple skills that science teachers, I know in Portsmouth, we need to start emphasizing this in our own classes. Okay. Thank you.
And now here from our college level instructors.
thank you all for coming. My name is Paulina Sabin, and yes, I'm in the Mathematics and Computer Science department here. Prior to coming here in the fall of this year, I've done consulting in schools in Massachusetts. I'm sorry, I'm not used to the microphone. Maybe. There we go. In Massachusetts from the pre-K through the grade 12 level, both in professional development, providing professional development to teachers, but also embedded in the classrooms with modeling classes, helping in curriculum development, et cetera, et cetera. So, but today I want to talk to you more about some specific examples about what we do, what I do in my classes with pre-service elementary teachers, specifically in mathematics. So, first of all, to open up, David Pugley has done a lot of work on looking at connections between writing and mathematics. And he's really identified three major areas where there are major connections. One is writing supports mathematical reasoning and problem solving, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. It also helps students internalize characteristics of effective communication. And as Phyllis was mentioning earlier, that we need a nation of citizens that can communicate effectively, that can communicate their knowledge, their ideas, their beliefs. We need that, and we need that both in philosophy and history, but also in the technical areas where those are becoming a lot more prominent, both in the job market, but also in just being a citizen. And lastly, writing provides evidence of logical conclusions, justifications, and answers and processes. And that is, for me as a teacher, I need that evidence of the student's understanding. There's one kind of evidence that I can get from them solving a problem, but there's a very different kind of evidence that I get from reading their writing about that problem. And again, the writing comes from, and I'll talk about later, from a couple of different stages. Kind of the writing that happens as they're struggling with a problem, but also that summative writing that they have thought about and have then formalized into much more formal kind of responses. So from the Common Core State Standards, this is I was hoping, as it happened, that everybody was going to talk about the actual standards. So I wanted to talk a little bit to show you the note on the range and content of writing in the content areas that is suggested by the Common Core. So for students, writing is key means of asserting and defending claims, showing what they know about the subject, conveying what they have experienced and imagined, thought, or felt. So it's a way of communication. And also students, and this is an aspect that I think is most important in our content areas, is that aspect of precision. And you'll see that both in the writing content, on the writing strands, but also in the practices, mathematical practices that were also alluded to earlier. So just to kind of give you an overview of who my students currently are, and they're freshman and sophomore pre-service elementary teachers. They've successfully completed K-12. They've placed it to credit-bearing courses. Some of them are mathematics and science majors, so all of the student writing that I'll show you is coming from that group of students. And the course content is deep analysis of K through 12 topics to support their pedagogical content knowledge, so the kind of mathematical knowledge that they'll need in order to teach in the K-5 classrooms, and also the post-secondary topics to support their content knowledge, the deeper mathematics, the higher level mathematics that they'll need in order to support their students well. So that was supposed to be in the wrong order. So this is what generally my classroom looks like. The problem solving happens, it's messy, it's ugly, it's frustrating. The kids get problems that they don't know how to solve. So they're not the word problems that follow, at the end of the chapter that, we were doing division, so there's 20 division problems. They're really deep problems that they don't know how to solve. So it's a mess. They communicate, they write, they scribble, they talk, they do this in groups. That part is a mess. I look at it, but that's not what I consider writing. Once they've gone through that and they've solved the problem, then I ask them very often, I hope to do it every time, but sometimes we just don't have the time to write. We do the discussion. But still, I ask them very frequently to formalize what they're thinking. What did they learn? What are the big ideas? How would they explain it to others? Here's another argument. Can you critique that argument about a topic that we've just discussed and just grappled with? So that is I see it as a cyclical, because those kinds of writing assignments or discourse assignments, they lead us back to problem solving with the what-if questions. So, and you'll see some examples of that. And that gives me plenty of opportunities to do both summative and formative assessment on all of the students. So, what I'd like to show you today are two sets of student work, very short writing questions, so that I have writing essays that they do for me that are 2 to 3 pages long. I was not going to have you do that in 7 to 10 minutes. So one is an analysis of what measurement is and dimensionality of measurement. The other is statistics. And then the other examples that I'd like to give you are just to show you what kinds of things we can ask in mathematics to promote that deeper thinking and analysis of the work. So, first measurement. This is a question that was asked on a group exam. So I do give group exams because they do work in groups for the semester. So the student claims that a perimeter is a two-dimensional measure because one needs to know both the length and the width, or base and height, in order to measure it. How would you respond to measure it? How would you respond to that student? Okay? Both of the students that I'll show you were able to successfully calculate the area and perimeter of any shape I gave them. Okay. So this is the first one. Perimeter is a one-dimensional measure, says this student. Perimeter is one-dimensional because if you squished it down and laid it, that it would form a line. So she's taking the perimeter of the rectangle, she's squishing it down, laying it out, and it's actually a line, which means it is one-dimensional. Break up the square into four parts, then take parts to form a line. Perimeter is one-dimensional because when it is in its simplest form, it only has one dimension. This was on an exam, so if this was on an actual assignment, I would send this back. I think this gave me enough evidence that the student understood the concept, but I would send this then back and say, can you please formalize this and write it up in a more precise manner. On an exam, although I've played with the idea of having exams resubmitted, I don't currently do that, although I'm sure it's coming in the future. Here's another answer. I would tell the student that he or she is correct because the perimeter is the measurement of the outside and we're not looking for the measure of the whole shape. So again, I remind you that both of these students were able to calculate the perimeter and area of any shape I gave them. And this writing shows me not only gives me concerns about the writing itself, but also very, very deep conceptual issues about the mathematics. So I find that writing, to me, if I did not have students write, I would know about 10% of what it is where they are right now. So to me, it's just an amazing, empowering process to put them through. So statistics. Explain why the median is a better measure of household income in the U.S. than the mean. And again, I think 3 students here were able to calculate mean, median, mode of any data set that I would give them. Okay, so procedurally, they're there. The median is a better measure of household income than the mean because of the outliers. It is possible to have people who are extremely wealthy and also have people who are very poor. The mean is very sensitive to outliers, and if there were any extremely rich people with high incomes, it would skew the information to make it seem like the average income was higher than what it should be. The median is a better measure because it is less sensitive to lower high extremes. Okay. Anyway, so again, if this was a test question, so if it was an assignment, and I'll show you some assignments that I do, this would have been sent back to formalize, but it does give me a really good idea of their understanding. They're communicating pretty well. Again, this is another example. Similar, very high or low outliers like the mean, therefore it cancels out. Very poor and very rich households and gives a better average. This is an example of a student that's getting that understanding, but I don't think it's quite as strong as it was in the first one. And finally, this is a median, and again, I remind you that these are students that are able to do the procedural work. The median is a better measure of the household income in the U.S. than the mean because it shows the exact amount, while the mean is just the average divided of how many there are and something you don't know. So this is a lot of issues with communicating, a lot of issues with conceptual, very superficial conceptual understanding of the content. And really, the reasons I gave you these examples is because I think that in addition to the students being able to communicate their reasoning and how important that is, it is essential, I think, for us as educators to use that writing, to use their writing in supporting their arguments in order to judge where they are in a really more accurate way. So here's some other examples. The Common Core states that we need to provide a lot of opportunities in the content areas for students to do the writing. And it should be short, it should be from short to long, from time restricted to not, and we need to provide all of these. So these are some examples that we have in our class. Some very general questions. When faced with a mathematical problem, you don't know how to solve, what strategies do you use to help you solve it? So that gives me an idea of where they're coming from as far as problem solvers. What is a big idea that you learned from class today? This is a big thing for our students because they're becoming educators. I want them to be able to identify the big idea that they're trying to address. What is the difference between an intersection and a union of two sets? That is not a pictorial thing. That needs to be written out in words. Looking for connections, definitions in mathematics. Those are important, and I think that it's important for students to write those definitions to be able to not only come to them, but also not only read them and regurgitate them, but also develop them and write them out. Some longer assignments. For example, write a paragraph explaining why defining 1 over n as a one piece out of n equal pieces is not sufficient for a deep understanding of fractions. So that's what they grappled with, and this is a summative kind of writing piece for them. We would have talked about this kind of thing and looked at counterexamples to this for 2 classes. And after that, they need to go back and really formulate their reasoning. So this isn't a grappling and frustration and mess of problem solving. This is a summarizing what they're knowing. And write a paragraph including a better definition. Some other things that they do. This one would have been given to me, then I would have given back the response and they would have resubmitted it. You are an alien from planet 6EM. The number system is based on grouping by sixes, a base 6 system. You meet an earthling in your travels and have to explain your number system to her, so please do that. Okay? So they work on it together. They give me the response. I give it back to them, say, can you please formulate? And most of it is precision of language and the flow of the argument. Yeah. And finally, I wanted to give you this just to show you that the range. This is probably the longest assignment that I give them. It's in terms of writing, and it does, it's a argument that takes about 3 to 4 pages for most of them. We talk about the linear functions and how the different representations are connected. So the parameters of the function here is given a and b, and we're interested in how those parameters appear in a table of values. So I've asked them in groups to come to write in class, to write what they think the connections are. Then I type them in. And in fact, this is what some of the responses are. So I will type in verbatim. I will then give them back to them and ask them to analyze the strongest summary for the role of A in a table, the 2 weakest summaries, why they're weak, the strongest summary for the second parameter, and the 2 weakest. And that really does take them, it's a really challenging assignment for them. Okay, and they do have to resubmit frequently. So the writing for me, in addition to my own personal ability to assess their understanding, it hits on pretty much every single mathematical practice that is included in the Common Core. They are challenged to make sense of the problem and persevere, and that's kind of the final stage of that process. The constructing arguments, critiquing other arguments, attending to precision. I'm not looking for all of them, but attending to precision, not only in mathematics, but in the language as well. So I think writing permeates all of this. And just kind of another, again, that's that schematic. It's a cycle, and I can't isolate. I can't say that it's a math content and then there's writing being added to it. I think it's integral to what we do. If you have any questions, please, if you'd like to see any of these assignments up close and personal, please feel free to email me. And the other thing I'd like to say is that if any of you are interested, Bridgewater, the College of Education, and the College of Science and Mathematics are holding a conference here on May 23rd. The conference is by MassMate, which is Massachusetts Mathematics Association of Teacher Educators. So if you're trying to support teachers in your classes in the transitioning to the Common Core, that will be our topic for the May 23rd. And you can contact me about that as well. Thank you.
And now we'll hear from Dr. Matt Salomonic.
And so, good evening, afternoon, whatever you consider this to be. So can I get a quick show of hands? How many math instructors do we have in the audience? We do have a couple. Excellent. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. The rest of us are as well. But I want to say a few words. Paulina did a great job, I think, of summarizing a lot of the different ways in which we can engage students with mathematics. So I want to flesh that out and open it up a little bit more, but also to suggest a second and perhaps a little bit more subversive idea that you'll see as we go along here for a second. So first of all, what we're all here for today and in general to do as educators is not so much about writing, and it's not so much about mathematics, but it's really about critical reasoning. That the goal of kind of a liberal education, especially at the higher ed level, is to build critical thinkers and critical reasoners. And writing and mathematics are two modes in which students can develop those critical reasoning skills. And I think just based on who all of you are and based on the work that the WAC folks have done so well to create the choir to which I am preaching, is that writing across the curriculum is really being sold as a way of engaging critical reasoning through the use of writing skills. And I don't know about you, but I'm pretty convinced that that works, that students are able to really develop those critical reasoning skills by expressing what they know in writing, that's the summative part, and also developing new understanding through creating their own vocabulary and their own writing at the formative stage. So I'm sold on that aspect of it, that writing really does impact critical reasoning. What's a little more interesting is that it's my personal opinion that mathematics and carefully chosen contextual numerical examples that engage students' numeracy skills can also be a help toward building critical reasoning in other disciplines. So, for instance, a historian who approaches a table of data gains a better understanding of history using elementary mathematical skills. An artist who engages certain ideas of proportion or even information design, if you're building an infographic like we saw earlier, gains a better understanding of design through numeracy and quantitative concepts. So each of the pathways on this little triangle behind me is really a two-way street. That it's my belief that numeracy and mathematics can enhance understanding in other disciplines, as well as make people more numerate and more confident mathematically. So here at Bridgewater, just this year, we started a learning community called Quantity Across the Curriculum. That's QUAC. I'm one of the facilitators. My co-facilitator is Stacy Sheriff in the English department is also with us today. Good to see you. Actually, in 17 hours and 35 minutes from now, we are having our end of the year plenary event in this room. So that's tomorrow. Those of you who didn't catch the 17-hour reference. You're all welcome to attend. If you'd like to talk to me during our dinner portion about signing up and coming, it's in the middle of the day, unfortunately, 11:15 to 2 o'clock. But we're having our end of the year wrap-up event. So just wanted to sneak in a quick plug for that. Our website is listed up here as well for more resources, one of which will be this presentation after I'm done today. I'll post that. Now, the nexus from mathematics to critical reasoning is what math teachers, I think, spend most of their time thinking about. How do we get students to be better critical reasoners within mathematics? How do we get them to understand that concept better? But as any teacher of mathematics knows all too well, here be dragons. That it's getting students to develop critical reasoning purely through mathematical modes doesn't land for every student. And it's probably because, in my opinion, that those other critical reasoning skills that they're developing in the other areas in their education are not being enfranchised maybe well enough in a lot of mathematics courses. So what I want to, of course, say a little bit more about today is what about this street going the other direction? How can students build better critical reasoning in mathematical contexts through the use of writing? So how do we use writing to facilitate understanding of mathematics? So this is a statement that was perhaps less true now than it was in the past, but Barbara Rose, a math educator, writes in a great MAA publication, the Mathematical Association of America, one of their books that came out maybe a decade ago. It's called Using Writing to Teach Mathematics. It's available from the MAA for purchase. It's a great read. And Barbara Rose, writing in there, says that the standardized math curriculum expects students to do mathematics and not to think about the nature of mathematics or to raise questions about its existence. And I would add its context, its place within their life, its place within the world. I think that I'm not an expert on the Common Core standards by any means, but my impression of the way in which it increases the focus and coherence of the mathematics curriculum is that it's trying to enfranchise those reasoning skills more, to make it more, to give students more opportunity to confront the nature of mathematics and its place within their lives. So this is perhaps a statement, at least in the Common Core, that is less true than it maybe has been in the past. But writing, as we know, encourages understanding in mathematics, as with any other discipline, that is first and foremost critical, that it avoids the use of overloaded pronouns like it in students' reasoning. Because as a teacher of calculus, one of my biggest pet peeves is that students use the word it to represent everything. Why does this series converge? It converges because it goes to 0. Those two it's, very different things. And if you don't write that for yourself, you miss the distinction. So critical understanding is encouraged through writing. Conceptual understanding is encouraged through writing. I really like Paulina's example of each of the students was able to procedurally handle computing a perimeter in an area, computing a mean and median in a mode. But not each one of those students were able to conceptually understand what they were doing and why they were doing it. And given students' tendency to see mathematics as a set of rigid rules and policies and procedures to follow and not to be understood, I think there's a lot that we can do to encourage conceptual understanding. And I believe that the studies show that conceptual understanding actually improves procedural fluency, and it doesn't detract from it. And then finally, writing encourages understanding that's contextual, that this mathematics that students are learning in their math classrooms is not being siloed within just the context of the math classroom, but is useful. They get a takeaway from their class that they can use no matter what their discipline. And that really should be what it's all about, in my opinion. So let me give you a pathway that I'm using to help understand what problem solving looks like within a math classroom. That I think as math teachers in a math classroom, typically a lot of the problems that we ask our students to solve are symbolic problems, like equations, that have abstract solutions, like numbers. And so there's very little context involved in that. And it engages what we would call formal mathematical reasoning. All of the rules of algebra and arithmetic and calculus and those ways of reasoning within mathematics that are purely mathematical. And so that pathway of problem solving is what most math courses tend to focus on, because there's a lot of formal reasoning to get through in the curriculum, let's just face it. But of course, once we step outside the math classroom, what most of the rest of us, and by us I mean you, I guess, care about most are the story problems. The problems that are wrapped up within a context. The problems whose answers actually tell us something about the world beyond the mathematics classroom. And there's a lot of ways of solving a story problem out there in the world that are not formal, but are rather informal. If you're splitting the bill among a group of 4 people at a dinner table, chances are, unless you run in the kind of crowds that I do, that you're not writing down a linear equation and solving that linear equation for x. Right? Chances are you're engaging a more informal reasoning process to figure this out. And it arrives at a solution which is, by its nature, contextual, which is great. Because, let's face it, life is a story problem, really at a deeper level. But how do mathematicians usually approach story problems? They approach it the only way they know how. They turn the story problem into a symbolic problem. And then they engage their formal reasoning skills, solve the equation on the napkin, to solve that problem abstractly. And then, if you're lucky, at the end, they recontextualize their solution back to where it began. Right? I solved my equation for x. X equals 18.4. Okay, I'm paying $18.40. Seems a little bit forced, but this is how it usually happens. But to really succeed at that long way around, students need a lot more skills than just the skills they pick up in a math classroom by construction. They really need reading skills. And actually, that top line going from story problems to symbolic problems has a lot more steps in it usually than just the one, so don't minimize it. But they need good critical reasoning skills to be able to unpack a story problem, and then critical writing skills to add that context back in at the end. And the recommendation that I always make to people looking for ways of engaging writing across a curriculum-style topics within their math and their science courses is a baby step is just to ask students to contextualize their answer. They solve a problem, they get a number. Great. Now, tell me what that number means. What's the point? What is that? How does that number answer some question? So, really, writing is a way to enfranchise context in which students can understand their mathematics better. And not only that, it's also a way of enfranchising their creativity. That new top level on Bloom's taxonomy, right? That the problem-solving process is a creative process. And the extent to which students see mathematics as a creative enterprise often, in my experience at least, dictates the level of their math anxiety, the level of their engagement within their math classroom, and their ability to attend to detail and their ability to solve problems patiently, and just their ability to be successful mathematically. So let me just give you a few more examples of the specific kinds of modes of writing that you can do within a mathematics classroom. And the first are the informal ones. In-class responses like arrival tickets and tickets to leave. I do these with my classes pretty regularly, usually with open-ended prompts and graded on completion. Metacognitive writing activities where you ask students to meditate, if you will, on their learning process. How are they working problems? How well are they understanding new concepts? And just to describe how they approach solving a problem in writing. Also reading logs. I'm not sure the extent to which your high school students read their math textbooks, but I can tell you at college it is definitely not much better. And one of the obstacles, I think, to it is that students are too quick to give up because their reading of math content is too unstructured. We're not modeling that reading very well for them either. And asking them to keep a reading log where they can vent those frustrations and yet stay engaged in the text is one way of doing that. Or also keeping a journal, just a running tab of how things are going. You can do that online with the blog tool as well. More formal writing in mathematics tends to get a lot more press up at the higher ed levels than it does in K-12. But proofs are, of course, the sine qua non of formal mathematical writing, which students get some exposure to in their geometry classes in high school, but it's not always seen as a writing skill. I've seen some very poor geometry textbooks in my day where proofs are reduced to a system of 2 columns of symbols. Total disservice to what proof is logically and mathematically. So getting students to engage proof. And again, one of the reasons I think students tend to struggle with proof is exactly the reason that you mentioned. That is that they're quick to make claims, but have no clue how to support them. And a proof is just that. It's the making and supporting the claim. Write-up problems. This is something my colleagues that coordinate the calculus sequence here do quite a bit. That in addition to the procedural cookbook questions they ask their students to do, they also single out 1 or 2 and say, do this problem, but write me a half a page or write me a full page to describe in detail the concepts and how they related to how you were doing your problem solving. And I've seen some of those students come down to our math tutoring lab with these problems, and I can tell you they struggle with them. But it's a mighty struggle, and it's a worthy struggle. They're really great problems. Summarizing the readings, again, maybe research papers at a higher level, and lecture notes. I find that lecture notes are one way of formally writing mathematics that often gets a short shrift. I feel like students' own lecture notes are actually a mode of math writing that don't get enough press. So to the extent that you can encourage them to take better notes, that too develops their writing skills. But students are not used to writing in the context of mathematics. Let's face it. In fact, you will, as any math teacher who's tried to do this knows, there's an immediate resistance. Why do I have to write? This is a math class. It's the very same as the resistance of writing really in any other discipline, and the resistance that we as teachers would face when thinking about how to do this for the first time. So a little scaffolding goes a long way. To begin by just asking open-ended and affective prompts. How do you like mathematics? What are your experiences with mathematics? Get them to acknowledge if they have a math anxiety or a bad experience with it in their past, because let's face it, most of us do, even myself as a mathematician. So getting them to diffuse that a little bit first is a good way to at least get them writing in the beginning. Then you can introduce writing about familiar concepts, and then at the end, writing about more high-level thinking and the context and concepts that they haven't seen yet, but making those connections. So I wouldn't be true to the spirit of today's discussion without a couple of examples. So here are a couple examples of my own. Our Freshman Skills 102 math class is our developmental math course here at Bridgewater. So it's a non-credit bearing course, but in every other respect, it's a traditional math class at this point. Its content is roughly calculated to 7th grade algebra, if you can believe that. But this was from a summer course that I taught where I asked them to, just at a ticket to leave moment, 5 minutes at the end of class, explain to me what is the difference between multiplying and computing an exponent, which computing power. And the most subversive question of all, why? In mathematics, is this difference important? So some students, clearly you could tell that their understanding was there. Multiplication is the repeated addition of sets of numbers. Exponents repeatedly multiply the same number. Great. So very clear understanding. This person was actually a more mature student, non-traditional student. So she was an English major, come to think of it. So her communication skills were there. And after I read this, I knew that her conceptual mathematics understanding was there too. But then as we go along, we get a little bit less clear in what's being said. When you multiply something, you multiply everything together, whereas when you have an exponent, you are multiplying it from itself however many times. So again, there's that pronoun problem, right? The use of the word something and everything, or what a lot of students will resort to when writing about mathematics is using words like problem and solve very loosely. It is important to know the difference between the two because there are different ways of solving. Solving what? Isn't solving usually a transitive verb? Anyway. So those are some examples from my college algebra course. And going up a couple of notches in Calculus 2, I mentioned before that sequences and series, anyone who knows calculus, this is a topic that students struggle so much with. And in my view, it's just because of the definitions. What is it? What is the nature of these objects that students are working with? And so when they use the word it too much, they miss the bus completely. So I asked them, and this was after a series of a couple of smaller affective assignments, I asked them then, how do you tell if the series converges? So this is a summative kind of question. Some students focus on the process of how they approach it in problem solving. Some actually did focus on concepts. To me, that sort of speaks to a difference in learning style almost. So here's a very eloquent description of a definition, a conceptual definition of how we know an infinite series converges. It also includes a heuristic in there if it approaches zero at a fast enough rate. And they actually, I used the word it now, I didn't mean to. If the general term approaches zero at a fast enough rate, better. So this is a conceptually oriented one. This was a very good student at the time. And now here come the pronouns again. When something approaches zero. Then it says, I have a set of prototypes, so that's a strategic response. And then here's an interesting response that sort of looks ahead and tries to make some connections to something that we may not have covered. It seems as though convergence of series is related to the limit of the function. Well, there's another the problem. Anyway, so this person is sort of reaching outside of what we've covered and reaching outside of their current knowledge to something else. And even though this may not be the most accurate depiction, I think that it speaks to a desire to learn and to connect their concepts across the course that I found very encouraging. So anyway, those are some examples of enfranchising students' writing skills within math. And of course, the rest of you that are not math teachers, don't forget the other directionality on that street, that you can enfranchise students' numeracy and mathematics skills. Elementary mathematics, used for sophisticated reasoning, is a very powerful thing. So I'm happy to talk to you more about that as we get some freshness.
Okay. Hello, I'm Michelle Cox. I teach in the English department here. I teach writing courses. I also, with Phyllis, direct the Writing Across the Curriculum program here at Bridgewater State University. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how I see writing across the curriculum, which is an educational reform movement in higher education, working with the Common Core state standards to open conversations among teachers about writing. Okay. I'm going to start with this quote from Barbara Walvard. I'm not really sure about the logic of when this starts. There it goes. Perfect. Okay. So I'm going to start with this quote from Barbara Walvard. She's a Writing Across the Curriculum scholar.
If you're given it something to do, then it doesn't.
Okay, I'll try this. Writing is so complex an activity, so closely tied to a person's intellectual development, that it must be nurtured and practiced over all the years of a student's schooling and in every curricular area. Okay, 1986. First, I want to focus on how writing is a complex activity. In my writing courses, especially my first-year writing courses, often on the first day of classes, I'll ask students to describe for me the characteristics of good writing. Okay? And these are the kinds of things that they tell me. They shout these things out. I'm typing madly into my computer, projecting as they talk. And you'll recognize some things here, I think, right? It's kind of popular knowledge about good writing. And so then once we have a good list going, I start to interrogate the list. And I'll say, okay, great, it's a good list. Okay, think about a good poem. Is it easily understandable? And they'll say, no, right? No, that's not what a good poem's about. You're supposed to work at it. Okay, so I cross that off the list. I say, okay, a lab report, a well-done lab report, lots of flowery details. And they'll go, no, that's not what we're supposed to do in a lab report. And I'll cross that off the list. And I'll say, okay, a good text message, grammatically correct? They go, no, you don't have room to write a full grammatically correct sentence. I cross it off. And I keep going until there's nothing left on the list. And then we start talking about how our idea of good writing actually shifts across rhetorical contexts. That what's good writing in one rhetorical situation is not good writing in another rhetorical situation. It depends on the writer's goals for writing, the reader's goals for reading, the genre, the medium, the means of communicating, and the social context, among other contextual factors. So this is part of what makes writing so complex, is how it shifts, right, every time we enter a new writing act. And students get that. They know that. We also talk about another piece of writing that makes it really complex, and that is writing is a mode of learning. And I love the descriptions from our panelists of how writing can be used in different disciplines as a mode of learning. Writing connects new knowledge to old knowledge, right? Writing makes thinking visible, really valuable for the learner, also really valuable, as we've heard, for the educator, because they get to see and assess how students are actually learning. And writing, as Matt was talking about, encourages critical thinking, right? So this is what makes writing complex. So when I ask students back here, why, where did their conception of good writing come from? Where did they learn all these rules? They tell me, well, my teacher told me. My teacher told me these rules. And I understand why teachers would tell students these rules. Many students really struggle with writing. We talk about math anxiety. Boys, they're writing anxiety, right? And so I understand, to kind of help students get through writing, we'll simplify it for them. We'll make it easier for them. We'll tell them these rules. But writing is complex. It's one of the most complex things that we do. And I really think that it's complexity that makes writing satisfying and worthwhile. And so my own teaching as a writing teacher and in my work as a writing across the curriculum director, I encourage faculty to think about how to teach writing as complex to students. Encourage them not to oversimplify writing for our students, but let it be complex, let it be messy. And Paulina was talking about that vast messiness of problem solving. Writing itself is just as messy, because writing itself is problem solving. We have to make many, many, many different decisions as we're writing. So I want students to engage in that, the full complexity of writing. I encourage faculty in my own teaching, I try not to assign any rules to writing, because there actually are no rules, right? There's only conventions, right? And so to let students figure out the conventions themselves. And so when you give a writing assignment, also give students 4 or 5 examples of the kind of thing that you want them to write. It might be sample student writing from past semesters. It might be published text. It might be real-world text. But give them these samples and let them figure out what connects across these samples, what's consistent across the samples. Also, where are the differences? Where are the possibilities for writing in that particular genre? And students can figure that out. And that actually really helps them when they encounter the next writing situation, because now they've got this kind of theoretical framework for figuring out how this writing works. Talk about writing as problem solving to students. Talk about it as a series of decisions. When their writing goes awry, right, in our eyes as the educator, ask them, how did they make the decision about that part of their writing, right? I love the example of the 7-page kind of free-form writing. And so if we ask the student, kind of why did you set it up that way? What it looks like to me is this brain dump, like this wonderful, lush writing experience. We just write and write and write and write. I mean, that's wonderful, right? But then we have to think about how is the reader processing that writing, and help the student see that, the rhetorical piece of that, of a reader trying to read 7 straight pages of unformed text, and what that's like. And also really using a variety of writing to learn and writing to communicate kinds of assignments. And right across the curriculum, we tend to use these two categories. And we've heard a lot of examples up here already of these two different kinds of writing. And oftentimes they blend. Writing to learn kinds of activities often help students process and think through concepts, right? Difficult concepts. They can also be used to scaffold larger writing projects or writing assignments. Writing to communicate, there's much more focus on an audience and the reader. What's the reader trying to get out of this? How are you communicating with that reader? How effective is that communication? And so I've listed a bunch of examples here. For the sake of time, I'm only going to talk about two. And you've heard about some of these up here already. Literature letter. This is something that Art Young has written about. Art Young's a literature teacher that created a lot of writing across the curriculum pedagogy. And he has students in his literature classes come to class with a letter that they've written to their classmates, right? And in that letter, he wants students to talk about an insight they gained from the literature, but also a question that they could not figure out based on this literature. And he has students give them to other students. And then if the student can answer that question, they respond in writing. If they can't, they keep passing it until they find a student who can. At the end of that activity, if there's any letters where the questions could not be answered, that's the beginning point for the class discussion, because that's the teachable moment, right? Here's something that the whole class is grappling with. A Dear Abby column. I visited a high school in Taunton, and a health science teacher told me about this wonderful activity that she does with her students, where the students have been learning content related to health sciences and adolescence. And she has the students come in with a Dear Abby letter where you're asking a question of Abby, and it has to be contextualized, right? You know, these letters are often really situated. You learn the whole situation of this person, but it represents a real problem that a typical teenager would have related to some of the course content. And then they put them all in a hat, they swap, they take one home, and now they have to take on the persona of Abby and respond back to their peers, drawing on course content, but writing in that voice of Abby, right? And so it's a really wonderful way to have a meaningful exchange in writing around course content. And so how do the Common Core State Standards and WAC, how do they create conversations? And now I want to refer to the second half of Barbara Walvert's quote, where she talks about that writing must be nurtured and practiced over all the years of a student's schooling and in every curricular area. And so a lot of universities have created curricular requirements for students related to writing across the curriculum. So for instance, at Bridgewater, students take what we call writing intensive courses in different disciplines as they move through their degree. They take these courses both within their major and outside of their major. And this way they're continuing to write as they're going to college. And when this was first institutionalized at Bridgewater, the really wonderful side effect was that faculty now, across the curriculum, were talking to each other about student writing. This created kind of this prompt for people in different disciplines to talk about student writing. We also held a series of workshops, both informal and formal. At the beginning, they were often led by English faculty. Right? I heard, I think you were saying, we need help from the English faculty. And at the beginning here, it was the English faculty that was kind of going out and sharing what they did in their classroom. Though right across the curriculum program now is in its fifth year here at Bridgewater. And for the past 3 to 4 years, a lot of these workshops have now been run by faculty across the curriculum. And we've had faculty in the sciences, faculty in math. I think Matt has run one of these for me. Faculty really from across the curriculum, faculty that teach first-year students, faculty that teach writing intensive courses in the major, faculty that teach graduate level courses, leading these discussions on student writing. And that's a really wonderful thing. So my hope for the Common Core State Standards is that it prompts the same kinds of conversations, that now that writing is being required in the curriculum, in these different content areas, that what it does is it forces people out of those silos that Anna Bradfield is talking about, and to reach out to each other and to start talking about student writing, to find out what about student writing is being taught in different areas, right? Because I don't think we always know that.